this evening to our Evening in the Park series. Tonight we have Dave McMacken. He is our special guest and he is going to discuss researching Gratiot history. I'll give him a warm welcome.
Well, I'm at the end of my tether, so I can't get any closer to you. We'll let the sound take care of it. You probably wouldn't be here tonight unless you had at least a passing interest in history, and I wouldn't be either. But my interest in history is pretty broad, but I think most people's interest in history, or a lot anyway, stems from a search of their family. And I just want a show of hands. How many of you have dabbled in genealogy? Yeah, I knew it was going to be about like that. So everybody's interested, I guess, in their pedigree. Well, it didn't take me very long looking for my pedigree to find out I had so many black sheep in the family I better quit. And I'm not kidding. There were some stuff they did that was pretty nasty, and so I kind of just left off there and went for Gratiot County. And then you know what I discovered. Yeah, okay. Well, I have so much to say, and my mind is so bad that I have to use notes. In the matter of genealogy, some people come up to me and they know I've done a lot of research, and so they say, oh, did you ever come across, and I can interrupt them and say no, because even if I did, I wouldn't remember it. It's some horrible, horrible thing that that person wouldn't want to know about anyway. So I am not a source for genealogy. There are other ways of going about that. So what are the other reasons for doing historical research? Why would we even mess with it? Well, I have some personal reasons, and a lot of what I'm saying tonight is personal based on a few years of looking at Gratiot history. One is I'm just generally interested in what people did, who did what, how they did it, why they did it. Was it good? Was it bad? Was it dull? Was it interesting? Just the kind of stuff that you might find at the beauty parlor or the barber shop. You know, just a little bit of gossip, but all probably written down many years ago. And then I learned some lessons from the study of history, and these have been a big benefit to me just in my everyday living. Because, and of course, none of us are guilty of this here tonight. Oh, gas prices are so high, unemployment is really bad, I know all these people are having a bad time. Oh me, oh my, moan, groan, complain, complain. Now you don't do that, do you? Well, the study of history, and even of Gratiot County, has given me a little bit more freedom when I hear the complaints. And I would have at least two standard questions to ask somebody who's dissatisfied with their lot in life right now, right here. And in some cases they would say yes to the first question. Did you live through the Great Depression? And a few people have, but most of them that are alive today were pretty small, and they maybe didn't really understand how bad things were, you know? But for most of us, we didn't. And when we say, oh, unemployment's 10% or 9% or wherever it is, well, at certain points in the Great Depression, 25%. You know, so if it's a 9%, how many people are working? It depends on how you look at it. And then the other question, when they moan and groan or complain and times are terrible and it's so and so, it could be anywhere from the president to their dog. Did you live through the Civil War? Which was the low point in the history of our country. Probably the toughest 4 years the country has ever experienced. And it gives me a sense of perspective. I'm going to talk about that next Tuesday night at the depot. The more I've investigated this, I've learned some things about it that just absolutely surprised me. And you know, soldiers come back now changed. And we think Civil War, I studied that in school. Boy, soldiers back then suffered from the same thing that people coming back from Afghanistan suffer today. It hasn't changed. People are upset, bothered, can't find their way. Things have changed for them. So those kinds of discoveries for me have meant a lot, because I think it gives me a better sense of perspective on all the stuff that's going on now. I don't get as bothered over some things. Now there are things I should get bothered over, and I think I do. Things that I think are unfair, you know, to a variety of people, and I can get bothered about that. But overall, you know, times don't change very much, and people don't change. We're still human. We're going to do good. We're going to do bad. We're going to do smart. We're going to do stupid. It's just the way we are. And the study of history has helped me get a little better perspective, I think, on all of that. The other thing that the study of Gratiot history in particular has done, it has amazed me. And it's fun being amazed. You say, wow, I didn't know that. Oh, I can't believe that. Did that really happen? Yep, it did, and there it is right down in print. And again, that makes me feel like, oh, people were that way back then too? Okay. What were some of the things that have amazed me? The early pioneer times, and I've spoken on this a number of times and have written a book about it. My goodness, the people who came into this county at the very beginning, 360,000 acres of woods and swamps, and that was about it. And they came in because they had a dream. They wanted a new start. And they went through a terrible, terrible time, and yet they persevered. And it amazes me that they would come, go through what became known as the starving time, when some of them didn't know if they'd have a next meal, and still persist because they live and have to do it. And all of the details of those first 5 or 6 years truly do amaze me, because these people persevered. They made it through with the help of some very generous people downstate, but it was an awful, awful time. And then they finally had, they got their little farms in the woods enlarged to the point where they could plant enough grain that if they had a good harvest, it would see them through until the next year. At the beginning, they couldn't clear enough woods and plant enough to have a harvest of enough grain to help them get through until the next harvest. That was tough. But as they expanded their little farms, finally they had a year when basically they had a bumper crop of things like wheat. There was a surplus. They'd never had that before, and things were looking up. In about 1860, 59, 60, 61, and then they fired on Fort Sumter. Just getting on their feet, just starting, things are starting to look up, and the Civil War starts. And who goes? Most of the young men, they felt compelled to do it, and first they thought it would only last for maybe 6 months at the most. They would have those Rebs whipped and they would be back with their families. Well, it didn't work that way. And the families were left. You know, I'll probably give an example next week. Ira Amsbury, supervisor of, I think, Arcata Township, 39 years old, gets drafted. Who does he leave? A 9-month-old son and 3 little boys with his wife to do the farming. That just amazes me. And they muddled through and they managed to do this. In that case, with some help of Indians who wanted to trade work for milk for their babies. That amazes me too, because somebody told me that. That's not written down there. A family member explained that that was a favorite family story. The harshness of the time and place and the perseverance of these people in the face of horrible odds really amazes and impresses me. And then I guess the thing that I take a little bit of comfort in, and I still find it somewhat amazing, there's nothing new under the sun. It happened here in Gratiot. It happened on different places all around the world. Do you know what the main cause of divorce was back then? And there was a surprising number of divorces. Spousal abuse. and it's all written down in the records. And they put it in the newspaper. So-and-so got divorced, cause abuse. So, you know, you like to think that the good old days were both good and old. I can assure you they were old, but in many cases not that good. And so people don't change. We still do all the same stuff that we either should do or shouldn't do. Where do I find all this amazing stuff? Stuff that amazes me anyway. Well, one of the good sources, and especially if I'm going to write something about it, is to go into old newspapers. Gratiot County is blessed in that it has quite a collection of old newspapers, and any of the major papers have been microfilmed and they're easily available at the Alma Public Library. What was of most value to me in putting together this book, Taming the Wilderness, First 25 Years of Gratiot County, was the file of the Gratiot Journal. The Gratiot Journal had been published before the files that we have, but they start in 1873, and that newspaper provides us with about 10 or 11 years of history that is found nowhere else. And so it's very valuable. The editor, Robert Smith, was very colorful, honest, forthright, and in some cases blessedly opinionated and fun. And he would take people to task. He especially did that with when the boys were out, well, not hot rodding, hot buggying on icy streets, and went around the corner, the buggy overturned and the girlfriend got damaged. And then the boy was just a jerk about the whole thing, and the editor had some really choice comments to make about that kid in the paper for the whole county to read. I thought that's really cool. It's probably because I never got caught. So it was just refreshing to read through the Gratiot Journal, and it had lots and lots of detail, stuff that you could not put in today. You would be sued for libel. You couldn't do it now, but back then you could, and it was accepted, and I guess to some extent, you know, not only accepted, but the truth would be told, and if you did it, you can see your name in the paper. Such a variety of things that are in the Gratiot Journal. A lot of reminiscences of the pioneers. The pioneers within 20 years realized what they had done, and what they had done was quite an accomplishment. They formed a society. They wrote down their reminiscences. They gathered together for meetings, and a lot of what they wrote down was then published in the paper. That's very valuable to a researcher like me because it gives life to the 1850s, 60s, and 70s. We also have the Gratiot County Herald, where the journal starts in 1873, and we have at least up through 1901. The Gratiot County Herald starts, I think, in 1884 and comes up to the present time. And we also have the Alma Record, which eventually morphed into the Morning Sun, and that starts in 1885 and comes up to the present. Everything is microfilmed every year to make sure everything's updated. And then in St. Louis, the early, if they kept files, and they almost always did, I think some of them perished in fires. But we do have them starting in the 1920s, the Leader, later the Leader Press, and then that absorbed eventually by the Alma Record. It was the Record Leader, and now the Sun. So we have those, and then we have a few scattered newspapers from way back. Most of those are accessed at the Clark Library at CMU. So the newspapers they were newsy. I was cruising along through the Alma Record, you know, and I'm thinking about I'm going to see anything personal. Ta-da! My great-grandfather's suicide. Whoa, I knew about it, but I didn't know that much about it, how he drank the carbolic acid and the hired hand found him down on his knees gasping for life, which left him soon after. and he'd been having problems, the paper said. Well, I knew he'd been having problems because he was a dirty old man. What other things have been helpful to me in research? Well, in some cases, collections of letters. I'm going to use some of those Civil War letters sent back from the field of battle next week. Memoirs. Frank Mueller, I don't know what you had to do back in the 1850s to become an attorney. I'm not sure. I guess you probably passed a bar exam or something, but it was in New York State. Then he wanted to get a new start, and of course he didn't want a partnership, so he made his way to here. How did he do it? Well, he took a steamboat across Lake Erie to Detroit. Then he was going to take the stagecoach from Detroit north to Lansing, except he had to wait 3 days to get a reservation. Does that make you laugh a little bit? A reservation on a stagecoach? I thought, oh man, that's really cool. There were so many people traveling up into this general territory that the stagecoaches couldn't handle all the business, so he had to wait 3 days. Then he managed to wedge his way aboard and head for Lansing, and I think he walked from Lansing. That was a customary thing to do, and lots of people walked from Lansing up into this area. When he got here, they were ready for an election, and they had two people that had put their names down as potential candidates for prosecuting attorney. Neither of them was an attorney. They were just going to do the best job they could. Well, then Frank Mueller shows up, and he's a... And they said, can we put your name on the ballot? Well, yeah, I guess. You got to start somewhere. And he, of course, he was elected at a nice, tidy salary of $300 a year, which was a lot back then, and more than any of the other county officers were making. So the attorney was held in high regard, and maybe they just anticipated there was going to be a lot of crime or something, I don't know. Pay him well, and you know. He wrote a memoir later about the earliest days when he came and all the fight over where the county seat was going to be. It was going to be here or Alma, Ithaca. It went on and on. A lot of detail, real good detail. And I think that's, I don't know if the original is at the County Historical Society, but it's typed out and there's copies available, and it's a pretty cool memoir. I enjoy reading through it. The part that he did not mention, the personal part, was that he was a drunk and reelected. Family papers, some Gratiot family papers were given to the Clark Library. Elias Smith, whose house I can't quite see, it's across the river. On the other side, the Yellow House on River Court, the first frame house built in St. Louis. His papers went there, and there was a day book, like a daily diary kind of thing. Not a Dear Diary thing, just a record of stuff. And all kinds of interesting things in that. Just stuff, everyday stuff. He's building his house. The hardware is all made by the local blacksmith. That's all the hinges and the locks, whatever they were, and all that kind of stuff. Where did he get the paint to paint it yellow? St. John's. He got white paint and ochre dye or tint to put in it, and I think it's been yellow ever since. And so traditionally, you make it yellow because that's how he started out. Well, that's a very old house dating from the 1860s. But he had the details in it of how the house was being built. I thought, wow, I know about the house, but I didn't know that about the house. That's really cool stuff. And then he put in like little tidbits. I think I put it in the county book. He had a bull. You know what a bull's good for, don't you? And so people would come marching down the street, towing their cows, and he got a buck for each time. That's pretty good money back then for just having a lively bull. So he put that in because that was income, you know. And then he had people bringing him stuff from toting stuff, wagon loads coming up from St. John's and things like that. A lot of wonderful detail in those family papers. And then some other personal records that become available. And then the various just customary records like township, county, state, at the state archives mostly, or in historical societies, federal. like census, which is just standard, or war records. There are quite a few war records available. When I was writing about Colonel Elwell and his castle, I queried the War Department or the Records Department, I don't know, and I thought they forgot me because about 6 months later, this package, while you're supposed to pay, maybe they were embarrassed by how long it took, they never sent a bill, but it had quite a lot of stuff about Colonel Elwell, and I know that the Boyers living in his house have also researched his war records. Pretty interesting stuff. Interviews. When I was first working on Mr. Emmy Wright as a subject of something, and it ended up being a book that took 30 years, I interviewed a lot of people, and they were all old then, and this was back around 1970. And some of them remembered Mr. Wright. I was very concerned about that. Is there anybody left that even remembers seeing Mr. Wright? He died in 1912. Well, there were people that did. And this one elderly lady said that she remembered him. She said, I was a girl. And I said, well, did you see him? Yes. We kind of met on the street. I mean, she said, I didn't really know him, but there he was. I said, well, how did he dress? Well, he dressed in dark clothes like a businessman, she said. Well, they were nice. She knew the difference between her clothes that she was used to and the people in her community and the clothes that a millionaire could afford. Even as a girl, she recognized that. And I thought, okay, this lady is perceptive. Let's try something else here. Well, what color were his eyes? Blue. Do you know what happened in that split second? She saw Emmy Wright in color. Did you ever think about that? All there aren't many are black and white. When I asked her that question, she drew in her mind Mr. Wright's face with the blue eyes, and you can see that he had light-colored eyes in the portrait. To me, friends, that's authentic. I can use that because she didn't hesitate. There was no reason for her to say something else except what she saw in that split memory. I think that was totally cool. Now, what I really get scared of is when somebody says, oh yeah, Grandpa told me about blah, 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 and I'm saying, well, Grandpa's remembering stuff whether it happened or not, and I can't rely on Grandpa. I know what the truth is there. I read it in the newspaper as it was actually happening. So, I had to judge about how you interview people and who's telling the truth and who's just talking. Maps. You can go online and access the surveyor's maps for this area, for all the townships. What were they like? What was it like back then? Well, what did they put down? They put down, well, some of the surveying teams didn't put down anything except where the square miles were. And that's a big disappointment to a researcher. But some of them, bless their hearts, they put down a whole bunch of other stuff. They put down things like where the Indian encampment was, where the maple grove was, where the Indians made maple sugar. All the Indian trails in that particular township. They put down a listing or notation of the chief kinds of trees in certain parts of the township. They put down where beavers had made dams on streams. Really pretty cool stuff. This is before any white men were here at all. This was back in the 1830s. But those are available online, and you can enlarge it and look at whatever you like to look at. That was really fascinating to me because I'm thinking, okay, when those guys came into this area and came through the woods and had to ford the rivers and all that, man, oh man, that was tough stuff. And I don't know if they got paid that well, but they've been hired by the government. So that particular, those maps are pretty interesting. There's a wonderful 1865 map, and I think I accessed it at the Clark Library at CMU years and years ago, and now it's not listed among their holdings. And I think it's because it was already going into tatters back then. It's a map of Gratiot County and Clinton County in 1865. There's more, of course, in Clinton County because it was settled earlier. Then somebody said, well, it's at the Library of Congress, and it was very hard for me to find it, but it is at the Library of Congress, scanned. You can go to any part of it, bring it right up, and see who owned the land in this county in 1865, around the edge, all the villages, settlements, and four corners of any population whatsoever, a map of those and their streets and trails, and then around the whole outside edge of the map, pictures of buildings from Clinton and Gratiot County. 1865, they're mostly Clinton. But a very, very interesting thing, and once again, bless the computer and scanning, that's accessible. Atlases. Maybe some of you have an 1889 atlas of Gratiot County. That's a very useful atlas. Then there's a 1901, and I don't know about other atlases, but there are plat maps and plat books. County directories where it tells who lived where, when, and on what roads. City directories are very helpful. Go address by address for that particular year, who's there, who's living there. And then something that's really cool is the Sanborn fire maps. This is for insurance companies that are going to insure buildings for fire, and they sent out their men who mapped out whole buildings and indicated if pails of water were being kept on the roof of the sawmill, or if there was a hydrant somewhere nearby, if there was a hose that was hooked to a hydrant. These insurance companies wanted to know if in those buildings there was anything that would fight a fire or prevent a fire. And it's wonderful for researchers, because here is, well, for instance, the Park Hotel and the sanitarium and all that. That's mapped out. In Alma, the old sanitarium on State Street, mapped out. I had no idea what the layout was of that. Republic truck plants, mapped out where all the departments are. Sugar plant here in Alma, mapped out so you know where all the different parts of the plant were. So the Sanborn maps are a standard research source, and they're pretty cool. I was asked to do that on the Opera House, and there's not a lot on that because there wasn't much in it that was, I don't know, interesting, I guess. It's changing. Now I want to talk a little bit in finishing up about our 3 county histories. I don't know how many counties have 3 histories that are at least usable. The first one was the Chapman history from 1884. The Chapman Company in Chicago did large, thick, very beautiful biographical collections of different counties. They did mostly Midwest, and I think there were about 15 that they did in Michigan. One of those was Gratiot County. And this is what they would do. Guys would come from Chicago, they would canvass the county door to door, and they would say, they had a sample book from another county, and these were well bound, and they had gilt pages. They looked really fancy and really nice. And they would say, okay, we're going to do a history of this county. Would you like to be in it? You can have your biography in it, and you can have a picture, a portrait in it for $67. Well, $67 back in 1884 is like hundreds of dollars today. So you would have to really think through, do I want to be in the book that much? Well, it's surprising the number of people that did want to be in the book. And so they would collect information. Sometimes they interviewed people, other times they gave them a form, and they filled out the form and sent it in. They sent pictures in, and the pictures in the Chapman book were all converted from photos to charcoal portraits, which was a customary thing back in the 1880s and 90s. In my house, great-grandpa and great-grandma hang on the wall in their beautiful, ornate Victorian frames, and they are in charcoal. And I think that was supposed to give some indication of, I don't know, you fancied yourself high class or something. I'm not sure. They weren't, but whatever. Then Chapman, once he got it done, they came and brought it and distributed it. to all those who had subscribed, and then there probably were a few extras that they could sell. Well, the Chapman book, as far as I'm concerned, turned out pretty good. Well, the people that got it didn't think so. There was criticism right away. They said there's stuff in this book that they said wouldn't be in this book, and there's stuff that they said would be in this book that we don't find. Now, all the biographical material, the portraits and everything would be in the Chapman. There was township history, county history, village history, a whole section of that, and then they also threw in all the presidents. Well, mercifully, of course, by that time, 1884, they only went up to Chester Arthur. So, you know, they probably thought they were getting something really great. Well, today, my goodness. And some criticism was very obvious. They said there are people important in Gratiot County who either they decided they didn't want to pay the $67 and be in the book, or they were already dead, but they were important. And they never got in the book. And that was true. But that's just the way the deal was. The interesting thing, since the subjects of the biographies supplied the information themselves, read through all those biographies and you'll get a nice picture of Gratiot County. The people are faultless. They never did anything dumb or stupid. I mean, after all, if you did that, would you want to put in something dumb or stupid you did? And so you get a general picture that, oh my goodness, I guess I better move to Gratiot County. That's got to be a wonderful place. The people are all so nice. No, they were liars. So, that book came out in 1884, and people have, in the recent years, wanted to collect it. In 1906, the Beers Company out of Chicago put out another biographical collection. Now, they took some of the same people that Chapman had, and they simply stole the information out of Chapman. They changed a few words. They did the term paper kind of thing. Oh, you never changed just a few words? Yeah, okay. Some of you are trying to pretend you never did. Oh, well, I know better. So, I guess there wasn't any problem with it, and then they added people who had become significant or wanted to pay the money, who had come on the scene since 1884 up to 1906. The Beers was quite a large book because it had now more presidents in it, and then pages and pages of famous Americans. Now, I don't know if you want to buy a book that's just half presidents and famous Americans, but that's about what the Beers was. Nobody said they were disappointed in it. Maybe they didn't have very high expectations. I don't know. The biographies are somewhat helpful. There's no county history in it except as you go through the biographies and kind of glean out of it what's available. And finally, there is the Tucker history. Now, the Beers came out in 1906. In 1907, a newspaper editor named Willard Tucker decided that he would make not a biographical collection, but a comprehensive county history. That would be a big challenge. Willard Tucker, I think, had come as a kid from New York State, maybe. Family came to Michigan. The father died. Willard and I believe a handicapped sister, maybe, and the mother moved to somewhere in the southern part of the state, and eventually they moved here to St. Louis. And he had reluctantly gone in the Civil War, and I think it's because he had the responsibility of his sister and his mother, and he was only in for a year and the war ended. And he came back and his health was broken from having slept out in the open and just the deprivation of being a soldier. It took him a year to recover. Well, they came up here and he became a builder. One of the houses he built is on Pine Avenue. And I think he was a builder for 15 years. Then he went into newspaper work and he bought a newspaper, the St. Louis Herald. Then they moved to Ithaca, and he changed the name of the paper to the Gratiot County Herald. Yeah, and was a good editor. He sold out to Mr. McCall, and then he went to another newspaper. But in 1907, conceived the idea of making this history. He thought he could do it in 2 years, and he went around to people and he got kind of testimonials. So he could put an ad in the paper of all these prominent folks that think it's a good idea. It didn't say they were going to give him any money or anything, they're just going to give him approval. And so he did put that in, and it was a sizable list of, what we would say, supporters. And so he went about it, and he thought that his would be a little bit bigger than Beers and Chapman, because those were about 800 pages. Well, of course, those were padded with stuff. And he thought maybe it would go to 1,000. Well, he soon found, as I have found in researching and writing, that what looks like a very simple project that can't be completed by a certain time gets totally changed once you get into it. And that's, I think, happened to me repeatedly. Fortunately, I've never put a deadline on any of my books, which allowed me, I think, to do maybe a little better job with them. It took him 5 years, and where he thought it was going to be 800 to 1,000 pages, he ended up with 1,300 pages in one bound volume. 1,300 pages, he said. It weighs 8 pounds. And that was true. It was printed on good paper. The binding was so-so. Now, I want a show of hands. How many of you, either personally or in your family, know that you have a Tucker history? See? Yep. And that was just about the percentage that I could have predicted. The Tucker history generally comes apart after so many years unless it just sits there. And if it's used, the binding breaks. Well, that's your binding, 1,300 pages. That's a very fat book. And so there were issues there. He said, and he wanted to keep it cheap so people could afford it, he said, you can have your biography in 2 for $15. That's pretty cheap. You can have a single page, $10. You can have a half page, $7.50. You can just get a plain book for $5. And after publication, it's going up to $7.50. He had the impression right from the start that he was going to produce something that would be of lasting value, and he insisted, because he was a newspaper man, and you may not believe this, but he insisted on making things accurate. And he had been trained that way, and so the biographies are long. The biographies, some of them are, but mostly they're shortened from if the Beers or, I don't know, there are probably some people that were clear back in Chapman, but he made those simple and to the point. He used newspaper style writing instead of all the flowery Victorian writing, and they're easy to read. So he put those in, and he had extra books to sell when the book was finally published in 1913. It turns 100 years old this year, and I think that's pretty remarkable because it is still a coveted book, and it still has very valuable things in it. I think he got rid of the books that were left by offering them as an incentive to subscribe to the newspaper. I think you could get the book for $1 or something. He just wanted to move them. Well, what's in Tucker? Tucker did a remarkable job. This is just a fantastic book, and I say that from the standpoint of someone who has researched and written, and I know how hard it is. And he did. It was a major feat. He has early Gratiot. He has the supervisors right from the start, the township supervisors and what they did, the starving time, how the courts were set up, the poorhouse. The poorhouse was for the indigent, those who had no family to take care of them. They had nowhere to go. They were broke. Somebody had to take them in, and so it was the county. The county supervisors back then spent an inordinate amount of time on the poorhouse. First, it was way south, I think on, getting between Ithaca and Pompey. And they said, well, it's way down there, it's too far away from the county seat in Ithaca. So they brought it up to just south of Ithaca. And Oh my goodness, I can't imagine that they would spend that much time on the poorhouse. It was a big deal. And of course, the poorhouse is the last place anybody wanted to go, because that meant that you didn't have anybody, you didn't have anything, you were totally destitute. Civil War, lists of the Gratiot companies that went in the Civil War. Fairs, we had 2 fairs in those early years. And the biographies, lists of deaths in the different townships and the cities, destructive fires in townships and cities, the histories of the cities and the townships and villages, and who was elected to what office in what year. Lists and lists and lists. Fraternal orders, all about the Masons, the Knights of Pythias, you name all those old organizations, he put them in. The churches in the various villages and when they got started. The schools, when they were built, when they were replaced. A variety of stories about the schools. Companies, manufacturers, a lot of stuff about that. Coming of the railroads, the different courthouses, the 4 courthouses that were built, crimes that had been committed, mostly horrible crimes, and the casualties, maybe from fire, tragedies that had happened that were important, and even an amazing court case that was known throughout the state of Michigan of Jim Carr, owner of a brothel in Harrison and one in the lumber town of Meredith, who had beaten a prostitute to death, and then he had sneaked over to Silkworth's brothel at Arnold Lake and set it on fire, threw oil on it, set it on fire. He was not a nice man. And his trial up in Clare County, they declared, would not be fair. And so they moved it down here to Gratiot County, same judge on the circuit, and it was well reported down here in Gratiot County. It was a big deal if it related to Jim Carr. Jim Carr when he got to Gratiot County, they found him guilty, and he went to Jackson where he constructed wagons or something like that. Okay. These 3 county histories, I think, are of value, especially Tucker. Let's give him a lot of credit in turning out unusual county history, and still very valuable today. If you want the originals, I just checked online to see if any are available. Okay. Chapman is going for $250. It's pretty scarce. Beers is, they say, right in on the source, rare, $175. And Tucker, I understand, at auction, and they keep popping up here and there at auctions over the course of the year, generally goes for about $100 if you want an original one. Well, fortunately for me as a researcher, all 3 of these county histories were reprinted by the County Historical and Genealogical Society. And I was fortunate enough to be given the last reprint of Tucker. Why are the reprints so valuable? Those blessed people went through and made a comprehensive index of names. So not only does it indicate where the biography is, but wherever that man's name appears, and it could be 10 other places, you can find out by using the reprint or just buying the index itself. Those have been of immense value to me. This is the reprint of the Chapman without the slop. This is just the county stuff that pertains. And with the index, which is a very excellent index, this has become a very important book to me as a researcher. This was a very fat book originally, and this is the part that's important. Beers. Not much, but I mean there's a lot of stuff in it, but man, you paid for a lot of stuff that, if you want to know famous Americans, I guess, okay. The Tucker was divided into 2 volumes. If there was any slop in it, probably not. We have all of Tucker in this, plus the wonderful index, which has been a great help to me. I go to this repeatedly. So this was a gift to me from Louise and Virgil Davenport. I didn't have the $50 to pay for it, and they got the very last copy and gave it to me, for which I have been eternally thankful. Okay, the last thing I want to say to you is, if you really want an original of the three, the University of Michigan has scanned all of them and they are available online, including all of the slop. If you doubt that I'm telling the truth, you can go online and see all the presidents that you want to see. So thank you very much. I would take any quick questions if you have them. Yes?
Yeah, do you ever go back and use census counts or anything?
Do we go back and use census accounts? I do sometimes, and the thing I discovered was, and I'm sure your genealogists understand that, recent census you can't access. You have to wait until they finally decide to loosen up a census from a while back. I had no trouble getting into anybody's divorce records. And the divorce records are a lot more interesting than the census. The last lady to live in the Smith house, Hazel Smith? Yep. She was a descendant of Elias, I think a granddaughter. I have been in the house. The Kahns had it open for a Christmas tour, and they had bought it because they liked it. They did not realize that it is the most historical house in Gratiot County. Yeah, Hazel, a few of you remember Hazel Smith probably. She was a true character. She was fun, yeah. Well, she gave away a lot of the antiques, very historic stuff. So, other questions? Yes. Is the index available for any of these, like for Tucker? At one point they were available in Ithaca, and I don't know if they are available at the Historical Society or not. But they had separate copies of just the indexes. That's a good question. The books are available, I think, in a number of the libraries. I know they are in the history room at the Alma Public Library. All three originals, and maybe the reprints too with the indexes. Yes? Okay, so the Society still has some Chapman. Yeah. Thank you. I'm glad for an update on that. Well, I hope you've enjoyed this nice fall evening, and have a good time.
Hi, I'm Barbara. I called you today
Yeah.
to find out where I was, and this is Ron Chapman. No, Ron Chapman. Excuse me, Ron Demas, who grew up here in St. Louis.
Well,
Hi,
hey,
how you
He lives
doing?
in California
that's a
now.
name from St. Louis.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.